This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Squash Canada Coach Professional Development Webinar Series presentation. Today's topic is Urban Squash Programming, presented by Urban Squash Toronto's Executive Director, Brent Adamson. Brent just recently took over as Executive Director, I guess a couple of months ago now, if I recall correctly. He has a Master's in Environmental Studies from York. He's got a graduate diploma in business in the environment and has some coaching experience with multiple racket sports. And is going to talk about the various programs that Urban Squash Toronto has that you can take back to your local areas and possibly implement. So with that said, I welcome Brent to today's presentation. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to write them down and save them to the end. But if you do have a question you'd like to ask as you go, Brent is welcome to answer as he presents. Just feel free to unmute and ask away. Go ahead, Brent, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for having me here. A little bit redundant as to the introduction already, but yeah, my name is Brent Adamson. I'm the Executive Director of Urban Squash Toronto. I grew up playing racket sports. For those in the sort of GTA area or know of it, I initially started playing tennis at the Ontario Racket Club. And during one of the summer camps, it rained. And so I was introduced to squash because we had to go inside to play. Really fell in love with squash at the time. As I got more into it, my mother said, you probably should try out badminton as well. So at that moment, I sort of focused on badminton, began playing that at a national level in the junior years. And then once I returned to university, I got back into squash, started off at the University of Guelph. I joined the house league. It was basically myself and professors, and that was it. And then I continued that as I went to York. After I graduated, I heard about urban squash from someone involved in the program. I signed up to be a volunteer. Before I even had the first meeting on it, well, I guess right after the first meeting, I became a part-time staff. Immediately attended 5 days a week and became a full-time employee within about 2 weeks. And it really was the sort of the urban squash model that pulled me in. A lot to do with the students. I mean, I started 5 years ago as the squash director. At the time, I was working with Jonathan Power. And then after about a year or so, I took over the role. And then as of November of 2020, I became the executive director. So just a brief sort of agenda. We just talk a little bit of the history of UST, how we came about, the Squash Education Alliance, which is really could be looked at as an umbrella organization for us. Then our actual programming model, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then our coaching approach, given it's a coaching webinar, and then the time for questions. But as Chip said, please, if any moment there is a specific question you'd like, write it down, or please feel free to interrupt me. No problem. I was just saying to our chairman, I think this is probably the easiest presentation I've ever had to give. 5 years of passion has gone into this, and so it's simple to do. So a bit of a history. UST was founded in 2010 by a group of Toronto squash enthusiasts. This include Clive Caldwell, which is our chairman, and he also is the owner of the Cambridge Group of Clubs, as well as Don Givloss, who's the former executive director and co-founder, and a number of professional squash players, including Jonathan Power and Shahir Razik. They were heavily instrumental to beginning the organization. UST was created to provide access to a sport that faces a lot of barriers to entry and chose to serve underserved youth in the Jane and Finch community. The first group of students were enrolled in 2012 from 2 Jane and Finch area schools that we still hold partnerships with today. An interesting fact, one of the first principals that we had a partnership with was Carl Subban, which Subban might ring a bell in the NHL. He's a father to 3 NHL players. He's been pretty instrumental in this as well. UST began out of the National Squash Academy in Downsview Park, where the courts were rented, and as a result of a Trillium grant, we built a classroom. Sadly, the National Squash Academy no longer exists. But we remain in the facility with our original classroom and 4 squash courts. Those who had a chance to go to the facility and maybe haven't seen it since then, since it was the National Squash Academy, This picture here on the slide gives a little bit of an indication of what it looks like now. Unfortunately, the doubles glass court, the singles glass court, the gym, and the remaining 4 courts were all removed and now has been made way to sort of joint facility. There is a parkour gym who is actually where the other 4 courts would be, and now it's actually vacant where the doubles court was. But I was there for a brief time when it overlapped with that, and the community was amazing. We certainly lost that, but have attempted to rebuild that over the years. In 2018, we achieved really a major milestone, and that was that our original class recruiting grade 6 in 2012 graduated from high school. Last year, another milestone, we had our first student receive a university scholarship in Canada. He received his full scholarship to Western University at Huron College. And this year, we have our first student who will attend in September to receive a full scholarship to a US team where she'll be on their varsity squash team, and that's at Middlebury College. These are really, as I'll talk about the Squash Education Alliance, that's sort of what the goal was of a lot of the programs: graduate high school and then post-secondary options. And really the huge success stories are those ones who were able to break down the barrier entirely and achieve that without any financial burden. We've now grown to serving 84 families. A lot of families have multiple siblings. We have one family who now we're at the 4th student in the family to attend our program. We typically have pretty good retention rates within families as they can join in grade 6, and certainly anticipate more growth over the coming years. Although we're currently living it, I sort of included it in an unfortunate part of world history, but of course, USD has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've had to shut down our programming in March. We switched to daily virtual sessions at the time. We briefly returned to an in-person program in July and August, and all the way actually into October, sort of a summer camp, and as things went back. And then unfortunately had to return to virtual programming in early October as there was a potential COVID exposure with one of our students. Everyone was safe, and actually the exposure was less than we thought it was originally, but we made the choice. And of course, with recent lockdowns, we've had no choice but to operate virtually. Our virtual programs obviously heavily focus more on the other aspects of our programming, which I'll get into in our programming. But what we've really done is shifted our budget and a significant amount of our focus away from squash and these things, and really more into education and mental health and family support. We've sent out about $50,000 in food support gift cards. We've provided PPE supplies to all of our families and ensured that every day students have access to tutoring. The learning environment has changed entirely, and so we've also addressed that by sending out laptops, technology. We literally just this week, we've sent out another 16 laptops to families that identified that as a need, and have also provided internet support as well to offset those costs. So I couldn't really go into what UST done without going into what the Squash Education Alliance is. We are modeled after this highly successful US initiative, the Squash Education Alliance, which is formerly known as the National Urban Squash Education Alliance or Association. So this was formed in the 1990s and has now grown to 20 US chapters and 5 international sister chapters, UST being the only Canadian chapter. I hope, and it is really one of my major goals and long-term goals as the executive director of UST, is to bring this, to really form maybe a Canadian version of this, but also really to take this across the country. Even within the GTA, there's opportunity for it. There's a lot of very deserving neighborhoods and communities. And this can be done in many ways. It can be done in the full-scale way we do it, or smaller scale, as I know does exist across the country in smaller ways. But if anyone is interested in doing that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me for any sort of assistance and how to start that. So the first SDA chapter was launched in 1995 by a man named Greg Zaff. After writing a graduate paper titled "Bringing Squash Down from the Ivory Tower: The Creation of Urban Squash and Education" paper. That really really brings together and summarizes what these organizations are trying to do, a typical affluent sport, and trying to make sure there are no barriers to that. So they started with 28 students. It was launched Squash Busters, which is the logo in the slide here, in Boston. They ran practices and tutoring out of the Boston YMCA, the Harvard Club of Boston, as well as Harvard University. In the coming years, programs formed in Harlem, Philadelphia, and the Bronx, and that is Street Squash, Squash Smarts, and City Squash. In 2005, the Squash Education Alliance, formerly known as NUC, as I mentioned earlier, was formed, and they provided both guidance and opportunity to formally share knowledge across programs, and also provide a blueprint for future chapters to form. This is the process that we followed. SEA currently hosts a number of events each year, including subsidized training camps and 2 national events, Urban Team Nationals and Urban Individual Nationals, which attract hundreds of students from chapters to compete and celebrate the community. It's been an integral part of our students, particularly because we're in Canada. We've been a bit separated from the general network, and these chapters really help for our students to see there are thousands of students just like them going through the same programming, and it's a great connection. Urban Squash formally joined the SEA network in 2014. As for our programming, what do we really do, right? We originally intended to remove the barriers historically behind it, as squash is historically an affluent sport, and we've taken a holistic approach to programming. Prior to COVID, our students were picked up by a yellow school bus directly from their schools, taken to the Downsview Park facility, in which they would spend half the time in the classroom and half the time on the squash court. This equates to over 600 hours of academic tutoring and 600 hours of squash training per student. We've really had to, as we take this holistic approach, we have to think about every aspect of it, right? One of that was transportation. In the area, particularly in the winter months, as it gets darker in the evenings, we had to think what would cover every single barrier to entry to allowing for students to participate in our program. And one of those was transportation, free transportation provided to them. All of this is done at no cost. While on the squash court, students are coached by our squash director and community volunteers. We've got a number of GTA squash coaches that have volunteered, as well as even actually our students and older students. Given the nature of the webinar series, I'll sort of talk more in depth about our coaching approaches later in the presentation. In the classroom, our students are provided academic help by our full-time academic director, who is a TDSB teacher, along with volunteers, a partnership with York University Education Department. And when the students tell us they don't have homework, which is far too likely, we also have a partnership with Oxford Learning, in which the students can access they're assessed through an Oxford Learning program and then assigned workbooks that they can do in our classroom. Our academic director also monitors all of the grades of the students and assigns individual tutoring when necessary and provides academic guidance. This is particularly throughout school, but particularly done when students go from grade 8 to grade 9, as well as in high school in grade 12 and 11 when they're doing their university applications. While in the classroom, our students are also served nutritious meals. This equates to about 320 meals served per child per year. Our character development model is also delivered in the classroom. Really, it's done through 2 previous methods. As everyone would know here, it can't be underestimated the lessons learned from both academics and athletics. But we supplement this through a guest speaker series, mentorship programs, volunteer opportunities, internships, and various other opportunities. Although a short sample size, in our 3 years of graduating, UST students have achieved an 86% attendance to post-secondary school. This is against the average of 55% of the Jane and Finch community. This, it actually is going to increase quite heavily. Our current graduating class currently has about 100% acceptance into post-secondary, or at least offers, not necessarily accepted just yet. So we're getting more and more successful. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has, really been at the heart of what we do. Our program provides entry into the opportunities we offer at zero barriers. Everything is offered at no cost. The only requirement to stay in the program is commitment. Really, it's all purely based on attendance. We even understand different sort of pressures. Students can, sometimes they approach in school a different club. We don't want to ever limit someone to being able to participate in that. So we have sort of built into our programming, people can take sort of leaves of absences to participate in another sport and come back. Commitment is really all we request. That's really attendance, attentiveness. Even if in the classroom you're not successful, as long as you express a willingness to learn and a willingness to get better, that's what keeps you in the program. They don't need to excel at squash at school. They simply just need to show that attendance. As you can see by the graphic, 97% of our students self-identify as visual minorities. And a key aspect of our programming is to provide a safe environment for our students to discuss race and mental health issues. Furthermore, we encourage our students to use their voices. This is through poetry, posters. We hold conversations. Of course, we particularly address the situation over the summer in world events. But this is something that we've been doing ongoing, raising questions. We've been able to really get a good, we've really been able to do this and go into it with our virtual programming, as it really provides this safe environment online, and our community has really grown as a result of it. So our coaching approach, as I mentioned earlier, we provide 600 hours of squash training per year at the Four Courts facility. Our students compete at every level of the game, from bronze tournaments to the US Junior Open. Over time, we've sort of grown more successful at our competitive athletes and the development of them. And really, I have to say, it's not due to court time. I don't take responsibility for it at all either. There certainly are higher level coaches out there than I, but it really comes down to student commitment and their love for the game and studying it, and the time that the students put into it. We really heavily rely on sort of external opportunities for students to coach as well. For us, squash is the carrot on the stick, right? It's what is fun. Anyone that's ever played squash has experienced that relief that hitting the squash ball as hard as you can provide. At the end of the day, that's a huge outlet, and that really certainly works for the students, but it's also a lot of fun and part of the community. And what that allows us to do is introduce students to a sport that they've never heard of, and really gets them in the door. What we do for our recruitment is we go into our schools, and we have 3 partner schools in the area that are middle schools, and then we have about 5 high school partners, but we typically recruit in grade 6, sometimes in grade 7 as well, depending on numbers, and we keep the students till grade 12, and then now we're working on alumni support. But we go into their gym classes, and to the best of our ability, try to explain what squash is to the students. Obviously, that's hard in a gym class. Fortunately, the gyms have all allowed us to hit the squash ball against the wall. We start off by sitting them down and really telling them all about what our program offers beyond squash. And then there's a little bit of a safety thing, as you can imagine. In these schools, there's sometimes 40 people in the gym class, and we all have a racket and all have a ball and try to get goggles on. And so I sort of hit the squash ball as hard as I can against the wall to demonstrate that this, the squash ball could be dangerous, and we all have to be careful. And that sort of really brightens everyone up, and seems to make them appeal to it, oddly enough. Once the students have done this, we do an orientation session where the students who have given a permission form to the school come to our program. They get a real actual tour of what our facility has and what it offers, and then also their first example of what squash is actually on a court. And then, as I said before, even that, it's all about, are you interested? Are you going to take something from it? And our recruitment is really amazingly successful. It's surprising when the first question I ask when it's my turn in the presentation to the students is, has anyone heard of squash? And the only kids that have ever heard of it are the ones that have siblings in the program. That's it. No one else has heard of it. I try to describe it like tennis on the same side of the court. And people kind of go, okay, I've seen tennis. So it's really quite amazing that we can attract students to a sport that they've never heard of and never even thought of. But I mean, that really is a testament to the game of squash and how wonderful it is. So back to the point of it's the carrot on the stick. It's we need to, as a squash coach, you need to make the game as fun as possible so that students keep coming back. Squash is certainly not the only thing that students come for in the programming, but if we can get them excited about squash and love the game of squash, each week, each day, they're going to return to the program, and then they get the benefits of the rest of the program, along with, of course, the benefits of squash. So our students range from grade 6 to grade 12. Just given our, feasibility of scale, we do break up our students to different days, although there are some days that are overlap. But as you can imagine, with 4 courts, 84 families, it's a bit over 100 students. We often have a significant amount of students on the court, and in some cases, we actually have 30 students on the 4 courts. So that's a pretty difficult thing as a squash coach to manage. Of course, when we had 8 courts, it was a lot simpler, and maybe it's a thing to look forward to in the future of it, different growth. But that's something that needs to be managed. You really balance maybe quality versus serving the most number of students. Right? If the greatest benefit from our programming are all of our pillars, is it better to make sure that we have absolutely high performance squash training, or is it better to make sure that we have as many students as we can come in and benefit from the greater good of the program, which, our feasibility to serve more students in the classroom is far greater, given the space component, but also given the amount of volunteers and things like that we have in the classroom that we can help. So, as a squash coach, you certainly need to really take a unique approach, right? In one session, you could have a student that is only there for fun, has no interest in getting better at squash, might be there completely for other reasons, might just be there for something in the classroom or just because their friend is there, right? But if you can still make it fun, they're eventually going to get into it. On the other side of it, you have the students who are completely into it and all they want to do is train. So as a coach, you really need to have multiple hats on to try to say, how do we appeal to all of these students? How do we break it down given our limited amount of court time, right? Our students come from 3:30 to 5:30. We do drop-in sessions on the weekend as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the sort of resources we use outside of that. Also thinking in sort of, traditional coaching, maybe behind clubs, is that we don't have, there's inconsistent attendance. Well, there are certainly some that do attend constantly. There are external factors, right? I mean, occasionally, there was a field trip this day. There was this day. There was whatever it was. The students aren't paying for it, so there isn't that same level of maybe commitment to come every day. And there also isn't that, parental influence to get them there every day. So some days you might have 10 students on the court, and then the next day, all of a sudden, you have 30. And so you also don't know which students are going to come, right? And so you need to I at any moment sort of had 5 different plans that was ready to go to be able to implement, depending on which students we had, what the vibe was of the day with all of our students, and break it down that way. So another part is really a sad aspect of it is that our parents are incredibly supportive of our program, but when they look at our program, they see squash as fun, yes, but really they say, oh yeah, they're going to get the tutoring, and they really want that. We've obviously demonstrated the success that squash can have in the rest of your life, but we don't necessarily have that same commitment from parents to say you need to be serious about squash. Sometimes we don't have parents. We don't have that same level of commitment as you might have in a private club, and there comes some complications to that, right? So really, we need to give an emphasis to fun activities, and then the way we do that is that we really heavily operate with external squash opportunities as well, right? So we participate in over 100 tournaments a year, partaking individual entries to 100 students or tournaments per year. We compete at sort of every level from bronze all the way up to the national level. And while some of the national level things are quite subsidized, and even in between, Squash Ontario has been very supportive in our province. we get students to partake in all of those tournaments. That really helps with motivation and interest in that. We also really heavily rely on the community, right? Particularly for our higher level students who might need a little bit more one-on-one coaching. They also might need that environment surrounded by other students that are there also to learn. And so our students are often signed up for external sessions. You really have to leverage that community building. We also do this particularly for girls and women's initiatives. We try to have girls in our program. Historically, it's been, we have retention issues from grade 8 to grade 9, very typically, as students go to high school. Sometimes they move to a different school. Sometimes they have external pressures and they drop off. But what we've also noticed is the percentage, initially, and actually in the last couple of years, our grade 6s, the girls far outweigh the boys in terms of percentage attendance. But by the time we get to grade 12, it flips entirely, and it's maybe 80% boys and 20% girls. So we've done a lot of work in the last several years to try to promote women and girls squash by volunteers and external sort of influences. And lastly, we really heavily emphasize positive role models in the community and bring them into our programming as much as possible. We do that with our guest speaker series. We do that with squash volunteers as well. Another aspect is really trying to get students exposed to the sport of squash. And so you can see on the picture on the right here, this was one of our pro days from several years ago. And this is part of, we call it a junior jam. It's part of the Canada Cup, although I think it was called the Cambridge Cup, I suppose, at one point. And we have our students come and play with the pros. And really that's available to all levels. It's just, I use this as an example because there's just these supplementary opportunities that really drive the love for the game and really are at all levels. Given the maybe not mainstream sport of it, exposing the students to these types of events really drives the motivation. And then all of a sudden training, coaching is all so much simpler. So with that, move into questions. Certainly open to anything, any and all questions, anything related to urban squash programming.
Brent, I'm not sure if you can hear me. It's Clifford speaking.
Now I can hear you, yes, thanks.
Yeah. My question is in regards to the funding arm of your program. There's a lot of extensive stuff going on here. How does that, do you have a group of people who go after the funding? Is it solely from one source? Is there a variety of sources that allow you to do some of those powerful and unique things you've done to engage those students?
Yeah, that is such a massive part of what the programming and how it becomes about. So our funding, we're about a $500,000 budget a year currently as it stands. So, we're about $5,000 per student to operate. Our funding really, it does come from a variety of areas. We have a board of directors, which we're up to, I think we're up to 17 as of today. That really contributes about, anywhere from 30 to 40% of that given the year. What we haven't historically had is really government funding. We have participated in grants. The primary funding comes from board members and then individual donations. And we more and more had success with foundations. What we've really found is that the money outside of individuals and boards are there for education, not so much there for the squash aspect. And so we really have to emphasize it. We have had some trouble with our name. Honestly, if I ever would rechange the name, I might take out squash out of the name and change it as something a little bit more educational to really cover that sort of holistic approach. Diversifying our funds are really important. We've really experienced that this year, right? I mean, historically, our events that we host, and we host two main events. One is an annual gala and one is a golf tournament. That sort of made up for maybe 25% of our budget. Obviously this year we couldn't do it at all, right? Our event was going to happen in March, and everything shut down in March, and so we had to postpone the event, and it didn't occur, and that was a big hit. Fortunately, we've been able to apply to a lot of emergency relief, both through the government, but also through, an extension of the government through United Way and the Toronto Foundation. Initially, we had a Trillium grant, which funded our classroom, but just historically, what we've found the most consistent has been growing a board that is supportive and having individual donations, whether that come from a relationship with a foundation or individuals that are just supporting it. We're obviously a charitable organization, so tax receipts are given for everything. And then we really are trying to move away from events, try to get more money into grants. But if you can get 60% of your stuff covered by foundations, or sorry, individuals and board members, that's a major success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brent, this is Lindsay speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi everyone. Hi, Brent. I'm just wondering, do you have any advice going forward for smaller groups on a smaller scale? Like, what would be your sort of top tips for clubs or groups to start thinking about doing their own programming like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Tip number one would be, say, contact me, contact Clive, any of these people that are sort of part of the initiation. It depends, I suppose, what stage you're at, right? If you're completely at the ground floor, certainly reach out to one of us first and sort of, talk about how you want to do that. And it depends how you want to approach it. If it's just going to be a small scale, get a buy-in from a club, right? Access to the courts at a certain time. I mean, our programming is directly after school. That's not, depending on the club, it's not necessarily high traffic time. Forming a board of directors would obviously be immense to do so. A partnership with a brand or store or someone that could supply equipment, that is really is a surprisingly large cost. That would be one of the first sort of approaches. Making sure that your area, you really tackle all of those barriers. It's going to be unique to each place, right? If you're in a community and you're going to operate out of the YMCA, maybe that's pretty easy to access. But if you're going to be, operating out of one of the clubs, depending on where it is, that might be really hard to access, right? So transportation may be an issue. You can certainly start with this all being a volunteer base, but there are, and I could share them with people that would so want them, but the SEA has really created entirely documents of blueprints to say, here's exactly what you should do when it comes to this, this, and this, and all that can be shared if people are demonstrating a desire to create one of these programs.
Thank you.
Brent, my first exposure to the urban squash program was actually in San Diego, and I was just I wondered, who's this guy with all these kids, and how do you get them all to follow him like the Pied Piper into the courts? Yeah. And it was amazing, and I was really taken back by it and thought, if we could only get something like this in Canada. And then fortunately, when I was at the National Squash Academy, I seen the program in its infancy, and I just want to thank you. And I'm impressed by how far the program has come, and I really appreciate you doing this call today.
Well, thank you, and I share that sentiment. I had never heard of the program, 5 years ago, and I kind of got brought in. And I had a meeting initially with sort of board members, and then I came into the program the first day, And I just, as we do with anyone that comes into the program, we walk them through a little bit. We say arrive before the students, because come through, see our classroom, see our squash court, and then stand there as the students run off the bus. And that's just about anyone ever needs to be committed to the program. If you see 20 students come out running into the facility, even though we're saying don't run, don't run, don't run, thrilled about what's about to happen and what they're, the community that they're a part of. I mean, that was enough for me. I then jumped on the court. People that are in Ontario might know the student Isaiah. Yeah, he's now just graduated from UST, and he's got a younger brother who's also two younger brothers and one older brother that were in the program. And he was the first student I played with. And that relationship, that building is so immense. And I've had it fortunate to travel to the US a couple times to the different programs. I've not been to San Diego, but I've been to 3 or 4 of the programs in the US, particularly on the East Coast. And I'm inspired by sort of what they're doing and the levels that they've been able to achieve. For reference to some people here, there are programs in the US that have a $3 million budget and do what we do many times over with many more students. And that's, ultimately our goal is to get to that point and have more staff and more influence. But I'm immensely proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
Great, thanks, Brent. Again, anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask away. Any other questions from anybody in the room? Okay, well, maybe while they're deciding if they have any other questions, Brent, first off, I do want to thank you for your presentation today and your time talking about urban squash programming. It is quite the beast of a project that was started out a number of years ago into what it has become today. It's very successful, and it's great to hear that you've got kids that are starting to graduate and move on to post-secondary success, and your comment even about alumni's, and how to circle them back into the program to provide, various logistical support will be very interesting to see how that goes as you continue to graduate more kids through the program.
Yeah, one of my goals, and we're not quite there yet because we haven't had students graduate university or these post-secondary things, would be to hire one of our alumni. So many of the US programs have done that and have sort of brought that full circle. One thing maybe I didn't highlight enough was the amount that we provide volunteer opportunities to our students. So, all of our high school students do their volunteer hours within our organization for the most part, unless they have particular, internships they want to achieve. But they get to give back, right? I mean, all of our older students come to, I'm sure anyone that's seen us in local tournaments might have seen myself, 10 younger students and then a few older students that are there and helping coaching, and they do that throughout the program as well. And so, yeah, it's just been just a immensely rewarding experience.
Excellent. So with that said, any other questions?
I just have a quick comment. Lindsay from Ontario here. I've been noticing, just looking at grants that are available for at least us in Ontario, a huge initiative for the government is servicing children and youth affected by different barriers like diversity, inclusion, and financial barriers. So there are little pockets of money all over the place, at least in this province. So that's something that we want to look at, is how do we encourage clubs or organizations to tap into these resources. And that's something that Brent and I will be talking about soon. But yeah, I just encourage everyone to look at, to discover the local pots of money that you can probably tap into.
We've had a lot of, we're very fortunate, but we've had a lot of success, particularly with sort of COVID relief funds. that are particularly related to that. For us, it's been quite, it's been flow through money that goes directly to the family, food support, whatever else. But there really is the opportunity to do a great thing here with these types of funds. And I'm sure they are available all over Canada. There might even be very good opportunities here as a starting of one of these sort of organizations. I personally have been doing a lot of these grants, and so if anyone does have any questions in terms of the application process or anything, or just needs a summary of what our model is, to be able to say how we can do this, please reach out. And I also quite look forward to speaking with Lindsay about this.
Great, thanks, Brent. So with that said, I think in closing, provided there's no other questions, I just wanted to highlight for those who are still on the webinar, some upcoming webinars that Squash Canada is delivering. With respect to the Coach PD webinar series, we have one coming up on February 9th, Coaching Beyond the Game. Glenn Mulcahy from Paradigm Sports will be back discussing that very important topic. And then going into March and April, we will have some free webinars coming up on school squash, squash 57, and double squash. So stay tuned for those presentations coming up, and registration will hopefully be open in the next week or two for those. And then just to highlight a couple of other key webinars that we're offering, we have an officiating webinar coming up on February 23rd, presented by Dave Howard, Referee Basics, Playing Without a Referee. It certainly targets new players, but it is open to everyone, and we encourage you to register. And then also from our female engagement program, we've got Bouncing Back from COVID-19, Challenges and Solutions for Women's Squash. There'll be 3 dates, February 2nd, 9th, and 16th. Those 3 times, they're all at 5:30 p.m., but the first one's Eastern time, second one's Mountain time, and the third one is Pacific time. So you can register for whichever one suits your schedule best. And so that is open to both men and women to have a better understanding of how to join the conversation, sharing your experiences through managing squash through the pandemic, and how to come out of it successful and benefit women's squash going forward. So it'll be a very interactive webinar. So other than that, I'd like to again thank you, Brent, for your great presentation today on urban squash programming. And we thank you. If anyone has questions, I will copy Brent on my email to you with the presentation slides and this video recording today. And certainly don't hesitate to reach out to Brent or even myself. And we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's Squash Canada Coach PD webinar.
Thank you, everyone.